A bad start by Tylor Megill led to the Mets' first series loss in 25 days. What will they do with Megill moving forward? I'll talk about that more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, it has been a rough weekend for the Mets as they have lost their first series in over 3 weeks. The Rays taking the first 2 games in this 3-game set. We'll see if the Mets can salvage one on Sunday, and hopefully they can, because you look at the division lead, the Mets went into this weekend with the 5.5-game lead over the Phillies. Suddenly, Phillies have won 2, the Mets have lost 2. That's a 3.5-game lead. Hopefully, the Mets can win on Sunday. The Phillies lose, and ends up just being a 1-game loss on the weekend in the standings. But this has been a weekend where the Mets pitching has come back to haunt them. And you could say that that's all the pitching. You can also credit a Rays lineup that has been nearly the best in baseball, really, for about a month now. They have been very good. It is a tough lineup. You're seeing really good at bats, but you can also look at the game today and point at one guy and say, yeah, he's kind of the biggest culprit to blame here for why the Mets lost, and that's Tylor Megill, who early on looks solid enough, hits the leadoff man, but then gets the next 3 batters out in the first inning, punctuating the frame with a strikeout to end that inning. Has a 1-2-3 second inning, third inning, strikes out the leadoff batter. Then he gives up a ground rule double, but not one that hit over your outfield wall. It was a not very well struck, shallow fly ball in left field that just bounced fair and then hopped over the wall in foul territory for a ground rule double. Then he gives up a base hit that scores the first run of the game, gave up another single, but buckled down, got a fly out, got another strikeout to get out of that jam. So through the first time through the order, through 3 innings, he gave up 1 run. Not too bad. Brett Beatty led off the bottom of the 3rd inning with a solo homer, tied the game. Great at bat by Beatty, who worked a full count. Then he hit the hardest home run of the season for the Mets, 115.6 miles per hour off the bat, an absolute rocket, a screaming line drive that just made it over the wall for his 8th home run of the season. That ball, again, was just scorched. With 2 outs in the inning, Francisco Lindor doubled. Brandon Nimmo drove him home with a base hit. So the Mets had a very, very short-lived 2-1 lead. Top of the 4th inning, here's why I said short-lived. Junior Caminero hits a home run to tie up the game. Megill then hits Jake Mangum and gave up a base hit up the middle to put some traffic on the bases. He did get a strikeout, but then the Rays attempted a safety squeeze, and it was a well-placed bunt that was going to score the run. There was no play at the plate, but Megill fields it, is running towards first, and just loses the ball on the toss. A brutal error, and it really comes back to bite him because he ends up striking out the next batter, which would have been the final out of the inning. Instead, the inning gets extended. He gives up 2 more singles, walks 2 more, throws a wild pitch mixed in there that scored a run. When it was all said and done, Tylor Megill had given up 5 runs in the inning, 6 runs overall. Only 3 of them were earned because of his error. Anyone who's listened to the show for a long time knows this is one of my pet peeves. I understand logically why a pitcher's error has to be considered an unearned run just based on how you do the math and how you want to look at it. But personally, I've always felt like fielding your position is part of being a pitcher. It's part of run prevention. And the fact that Megill gets off with 3 earned runs in this outing instead of 6 earned runs when it was his error that extended the inning and came back to screw himself over, I just never liked that. To me, if the pitcher makes an error, it's an earned run. It's his fault. He earned that run by making a mistake, not being able to throw the ball to first base, completely losing the handle. It was a brutal error, and it really bit him. Could have been a worse inning, too. He could have given up more earned runs because there was still traffic on the bases when Jose Castillo came in the game, and a ball that nearly makes it through up the middle. An outstanding play to end that inning where Francisco Lindor, ranging to his left, covers a lot of ground, reaches down, fields the ball in one motion because he had to with a bang-bang play at second base. Backhanded flip to Brett Baty. The throw sort of goes wide behind Baty. Baty reaches back with his bare hand, catches it, and gets his foot on the bag. A remarkable play by both of the Mets middle infielders there, and it did save some runs. Didn't matter because the Mets just could not overcome the deficit, especially because the Rays were able to tack on a couple more times as well. They scored another run on Jose Castillo, who stayed on the fifth inning. Castillo gave up 3 hits in that inning. It could have been much worse for him. Luckily, Luis Trenz gunned down 2 runners in that inning to really help bail Castillo out. The Mets got 2 runs back in the bottom of the 5th inning. Ronnie Mauricio hit a solo home run. Day after I ripped him on the podcast, I was hoping he would make me look foolish. It was a very impressive swing for Mauricio on a guy who doesn't give up a ton of home runs in Drew Rasmussen. And it was a fastball that was up a little bit away, first pitch, and Mauricio covered it. Really, really impressive home run. I thought his at-bats were a little bit better in this game, so we'll see. Maybe he can get acclimated quickly, prove me wrong, and by the time Mark Vientos is ready to return, maybe he does stick around for a while. You never know. Now, Francisco Lindor walked in that same inning, advanced to second on a wild pitch, and scored on a base hit by Brandon Nimmo, but the Mets would not score again. They went down in order in the 6th inning. 7th inning, they got singles from Luis Torrens and Francisco Lindor, but couldn't do anything with them. 8th inning, they got singles from Pete Alonso and Starling Marte, but again, could not cash in. 9th inning, they went down in order. The Mets had 11 hits on the game, but not a ton of chances with runners in scoring position. Only 4 opportunities as a team. They went 2 for 4. So really not a bad day with runners in scoring position. They just struggled to get their runners into scoring position. They were really scattering their traffic throughout the whole night, and it ends up being a rough loss for the Mets. But here's what I'll say. While it's a frustrating series, the Mets got off to a great start on this homestand. We talked about the importance of this homestand. One last chance to pad your record before you go through a stretch where it's 10 games against your division rivals. The Braves, who are starting to play a little bit better. The Phillies, who are having a good weekend at least here. It's going to be an interesting road trip coming up, going to Atlanta, then to Philly next week. And you wanted to have the best possible record going into that stretch. And you hoped that the Mets would win a series over the weekend. Now they're in danger of getting swept. So it has been worst possible outcome for this series. But as I said in the cold open, first series the Mets have lost in 25 days. Only the second series they've lost at home all season long. So overall, this does not make me concerned about the Mets and their outlook. What I will say, though, is the back end of the rotation is starting to, get my eyebrows raised a little bit. Paul Blackburn, the reason the Mets lose on Friday night, and that's coming out of the bullpen. So we'll see what he looks like when he gets a start this week, but definitely a rough outing. And then Megill has a bad start. And with Megill, this is a guy that I just cannot peg down, and that's what we're going to talk about next here. You look at the data, you look at what's coming out of his hand, the stuff that he has. You can make an argument stuff-wise. He has been the Mets' second best pitcher this year to Kodai Senga, stuff-wise. Don't get me wrong. David Peterson is really good stuff. He's had incredible results, canning homes, but I'll get into it in a second. What Megill has to offer could be so valuable, and yet he cannot put it all together. What did the Mets do with him? We'll talk about that in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA Finals are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart, win big. You also got your MLB action to look at. Maybe you believe that Francisco Lindor is going to homer in the final game of this series and the Mets are going to win. You can put those two things together in a same-game parlay, and if it hits, you're going to win big. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up because when you head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet If it wins, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We're getting so close to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. I really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. So let's talk about Tylor Megill and what has been a very interesting season. Going into his start today, you look at his strikeout per 9 rate on this season. It's 11.69. Now, why is that number significant? I was writing an article for Just Baseball about the Jarren Duran trade that we talked about at the beginning of this week with mock trades and everything else. It's going to be a really exciting piece for us on the site. And Megill's going to be part of the package that we are going to put out there. Now, Megill has a really intriguing case as a trade piece because of the data. And that stat jumped out to me because 11.69 strikeouts per 9 is a very strong rate. That's third best in Major League Baseball among pitchers who have thrown at least 60 innings this year. And I had to sort by that many innings because Megill has not thrown enough innings to be a qualified starter. That is where you get into the give and take of Tylor Megill, but third best behind Mackenzie Gore and Chris Sale. And still, if you look at the strikeout rate of 29.8%, that's also one of the top, I think it was in the top 20 in Major League Baseball among pitchers who have thrown at least 60 innings. He's also keeping the ball in the yard this year. Granted, tonight, that wasn't the case entirely, but overall, going into this start, you were looking at a home run per 9 rate of 0.7, which was 20th best in Major League Baseball. His ERA going into this game of 3.76 was a career best. His updated ERA after the 3 earned runs instead of 6 earned runs, whatever, is 3.95, still a career best. His FIP going into the start was 3.15. That was 18th best in Major League Baseball. Expected ERA, a 3.48, 26th best. But that's the difference between a Peterson, who the data doesn't love him for whatever reason. I'll tell you the reason. Not a ton of strikeouts. That's part of it. That definitely factors in. And sometimes he might give up a little bit more hits, and that could come back to bite him, even though that's just looking at expected ERA. Actual ERA, leaving runners on base, doing all the little things, fielding his position well, holding the runners. Peterson is able to outperform the expected ERA. Megill typically underperforms the expected ERA. One of the few guys on this staff that's doing that, and yet he still has a really solid ERA. It's because that expected ERA is so good based on the stuff, and we get into the stuff now. You looked at expected batting average, 218. This was all going into the start today, 80th percentile in Major League Baseball. Whiff percentage of 30.4%, 83rd percentile. Strikeout rate, already mentioned that, 89th percentile. Batters were hitting 255 or worse on every single one of his pitches. Again, going into this start tonight. Slugging below 400 on every single one of his pitches. A whiff rate of 47% of his slider. That's elite. Whiff rate on his changeup of 37%. That's really good. And even a whiff rate on a fastball of 28%, which is also solid. So he misses bats because of his size, has great extension. So he, that 95 mile per hour fastball plays up even more because he just gets downhill so well. Gets chase, gets whiff, all this stuff, right? Yet, you look at him and you look at what he's done this season, and it's hard to say, yeah, keep him in the rotation all year. It's funny because David Stearns was talking, on Friday about the expected ERA question, right? He was asked about it. And he said, they don't really pay attention to expected ERA. They don't even necessarily pay attention to ERA. They are paying attention to what's coming out of the pitcher's hands. That is how the Mets get an edge, because I'm sure most teams are doing this, but what they are looking at is characteristics of pitches, pitch shapes. How are each of your pitches playing in the zone? How are they playing outside of the zone? Are you getting the chase? All these different things. And you look at Megill's profile, and it can be tantalizing because of all of those things that he does well. And yet, over his last 8 starts, he's given up 4 runs 5 times. Now, I mean, technically this was 3 earned runs, but whatever. 3 earned runs, 6 runs overall. We'll just lump it in with the other starts the other 4 starts where he gave up 4 earned runs. Okay. He's only made it through 5 innings 4 times over the last 8 starts. This all goes back to when the calendar turned to May. Everyone loves to point that out with Megill. I'm not going to get into it again. I guess I will since I brought it up. If you look back at Megill's career, there's really only been 2 years where this narrative has come together, where he's had the great April and the disastrous rest of the season, or the disastrous May. But in 2022, it was a great April. He got hurt in the beginning of May. Every other year, he hasn't even had the great April. This year, he did have a great April, and yes, he has fallen off a cliff since then. But he's had a couple of good starts since April. They make you think, oh, yeah, there he is. He looks pretty good. He just struck out 9 Red Sox in 4 innings or whatever it was, and then he doesn't make it out of the 5th. And it's like, oh, okay, well, here goes Megill again. This year, he's made it through 6 innings just twice in 14 starts. He's averaging less than 5 innings per start, 4.88. So what do you do with Tylor Megill? Because the other part about this, if you just look at value based on contract and team control, you can make a case that this guy's one of the more valuable pitchers in this organization, because if nothing else, he's proven that he can be a back-end starter in the big leagues. And because he's a late bloomer, he's only making about $2 million this year. He's going to remain cheap for this season and the next 2, his final 2 years of arbitration. The Mets have an additional year of control of Megill compared to their control over David Peterson. Peterson is just 1 more season after this year. Megill, you got 2 more. He's 29 years old. Again, what do you do? Because you don't just cut the guy. This is the last year he'll have an option if you do utilize it. And I think they might have to coming up soon once they get completely healthy. So let's just say you get to that point in late July where everybody's back. Senga's back. Manaea's back. Montas is back, and he actually looks good. There's going to be no room for Megill. He's going to get squeezed. This is the time to trade Tylor Megill. It is. He has legitimate value. Other teams are going to look at the data. They're going to look at the strikeout rate. They're going to look at a 6'7" starting pitcher who's stretched out, and they're going to think, well, Tylor Megill is a lot better than our 4th and 5th starter right now. Part of why he was in that Jaron Durand mock trade article that we're writing up at Just Baseball is because the Red Sox have not gotten good starting pitching this year. If they're looking at their team and they're saying, we're going to trade Durand at the deadline because we have this glut of outfielders, but we're still trying to win, you give them Megill, and that guy plugs right into the middle of the rotation. Heck, he might be their number 3 starter. Legitimately. We talked about that with the Mullins possibly, trading for Cedric Mullins. You could call the Orioles and say, hey, you get 2.5 years of Tylor Megill. We're only getting 2 months of Cedric Mullins. That's a fair 1-for-1 trade, in my opinion. Now we'll see if Mike Elias feels the same way, but gave up a heck of a lot more to get what's the guy's name? Trevor Rogers from the Marlins last year. At this very moment, is Megill's spot in the rotation at risk? I don't think so. We talked about Montas yesterday. Terrible rehab start. Has been really bad, and now the question is, what do you do with him? He's going to get another rehab start. Then his clock will expire on his rehab assignment. They could extend it. They could make a petition to Major League Baseball if he signs off on it, and they might be able to get more time added to his rehab clock and see if he can work his way through it in the minor leagues. Otherwise, you're either going to just stick him in the rotation without seeing any success on his rehab stint, or you're going to stick him in the bullpen. Paul Blackburn. It's already been pretty clear that the Mets view Tylor Megill ahead of Blackburn on the pecking order. That makes Blackburn expendable too, but you're not going to get much for Paul Blackburn. You might get a player to be named later or something, but you're not going to get anything of real value for Blackburn. You might get, again, a player to be named later or a low-level prospect that you like, or who knows, maybe you find one of those perfect trades where you trade Blackburn to a team that has a lack of starting pitching and a lot of relief help, and it's a starter for reliever swap. Maybe that happens, but you're not getting something good. You can legitimately get a piece from Megill. So we'll see how Megill pitches. He could ruin that trade value. They can keep him in the rotation. He could get blown up his next 3 starts, and he might not have much value. I'm telling you right now, looking at the data, he is going to carry some weight at the deadline to potentially get moved. It's just a matter of if the Mets can find the right trade for it, because at the end of the day, they also probably value him a lot just because of what's coming out of his hand. how good his stuff looks, how well it plays in the zone when he does attack the zone. But he's a frustrating player right now because, as I've talked about since the beginning of spring training, when we were just trying to figure out, okay, who makes this rotation, I remember saying that Megill has better stuff than Griffin Canning, better stuff than Paul Blackburn. But can he put it together? And over the last 8 starts, the resounding answer is no, he cannot. But I'm sure he'll be on the mound against the Phillies this week, right? Yeah, probably. And we'll see how he does in that game. Has the ability to be nasty. It's just a matter of if on that given night, things are working out for him and he's able to get the job done. But this was a brutal inning for him that really just showcased why he is a puzzle. Because first time through the order, looked really good. Deals with some adversity, makes an error, and he lets an inning completely get away from him. Now, the other thing I'm wondering when it comes to this rotation, is there a world where Nolan McLean can actually factor into the rotation this year? We're going to talk about the Mets' top pitching prospect here in just a minute. If you're an everydayer that's always tuning into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks from the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. You get a lineup graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to septex.com/LockedOnMets. This year, Nolan McLean has become the best pitching prospect in the Mets system. Flew through AA, has pitched very well in AAA, which is a tough task for Mets prospects. They have really struggled pitching for the Syracuse Mets over the last couple of years. But here's McLean handling the transition with ease. So it makes you wonder, as you're seeing Paul Blackburn have a bad relief outing, as you're seeing Tylor Megill continue to struggle, as you're seeing Frankie Montas not pitching well in his rehab stint, as you're seeing Kodai Senga just get hurt and Sean Manaea is still working his way back, is there a world where the Mets are looking at the Phillies series? McLean just pitched same day as Megill. Is there a world where you just say, you know what? This is an important series, and we have a better chance to win with McLean on the mound than Tylor Megill? Could that happen? Here's what David Stearns said on Friday about making decisions on promoting top prospects, particularly the top pitching prospects. He said, I think we are going to make those types of decisions based exclusively on who and what grouping of players gives us the best chance to win. Interesting. Continues to say, and so if we have a prospect that gets to the point that we believe he gives us the best chance to win over someone else, we are going to strongly consider it. Interesting. Then a little bit of cold water. With that said, I think the volume of established major league pitchers we have makes that a steeper hill to climb for a prospect at this point. We have pitchers at the major league level who we really believe in, who have proven that they can pitch at a high level. And so for a prospect to jump that, especially in a pennant race, is a high bar, not an impossible bar, but it's a high bar. So where does that leave Nolan McLean? He's 23 years old. Mets drafted him in the 3rd round back in 2023. A two-way player at the time, started last year as a two-way player. Did put up some fun offensive stats in Brooklyn, but once he saw AA pitching, he decided, let's just stick to being a AA pitcher instead of facing AA pitching. And that transition to being a full-time pitcher has worked wonders for him this season. He has been the best prospect in the Mets system this year. His start on Friday night, same time as Megill was getting blown up, 6 innings pitched, 4 hits, 3 runs allowed, 2 of them earned, 3 walks, 3 strikeouts. His last 2 outings before that were piggybacking Montas's rehab starts. He pitched significantly better than the big leaguer. He allowed 2 runs in 4 innings, the first rehab start for Montas, but the first relief appearance. Then 1 run in 5 1/3 innings pitched with only 2 hits allowed. That was a really good outing. This year, overall, if you're looking at his stats, McLean pitched to a 1.37 ERA in 5 starts in AA, now has a 2.56 ERA in 7 outings with Syracuse, 2 relief appearances, 5 starts. Last year, Christian Scott made 9 starts in AAA, pitched to a 2.76 ERA. Those are the 2 pitching prospects over these last few years who have actually found success pitching at the highest level of the minor leagues. Blade Tidwell is actually doing pretty decent right now in AAA. I don't want to knock him too much. Last year, a lot of struggles. This year, he is starting to find it. 4.14 ERA in 12 starts, 69 strikeouts, and 58 and 2/3 innings pitched. Actually, might be 11 starts and a relief appearance. Regardless, he has thrown the ball pretty well. Brandon Sproat, who went into this season as the top pitching prospect the Mets have, pitching to a 5.31 ERA in 13 starts. And I will say the last 4 starts have been encouraging for Sproat. There was 2 starts where he allowed 2 runs over 5 innings pitched, a start where he went 6 scoreless. That was the second to last start. And then his start this week, he went 5 1/3, allowed 3 runs on 5 hits and 2 walks. So those are some better numbers, but he's not striking out many still, and does not look like the guy that tore through high A and AA last season. Nolan McLean right now has a low 2s ERA on the season if you combine AA and AAA. I would look at McLean right now, and I would expect that if you gave him 10 starts in the big leagues and you gave Paul Blackburn those same 10 starts, I would think McLean would put up some better numbers. And I'd be very curious comparing him to Megill. I honestly would think that maybe McLean would be better than Megill. Against the Phillies, the unknown of a top pitching prospect coming up and facing that lineup, that'd be a tough spot to make your debut in Philadelphia. But there's a world after what I just watched with Megill where I do think he might give the Mets the best chance to win in that series. But I also don't think it's likely that the Mets have him cut the line in front of these pitchers who are coming off of injury. Like Blackburn really hasn't gotten a chance to show what he's made of in the rotation. Are they going to keep Blackburn in the bullpen for McLean to come up and be a starting pitcher? I don't think so. Are they going to option Megill to bring up McLean? I don't think so. And then once you get the other guys healthy, then it's even harder for him to break through this rotation. Not to mention, the fact is you don't need to protect him from the Rule 5 draft this offseason. So that's always another layer of this where you can keep him stashed in the minor leagues. You don't have to add him to the 40, start his service time clock, potentially use one of his options if he ever does get demoted back down. You can just keep him dominating in AAA, keep his stock up in case you had to move him at the deadline. I think he's probably right now, I'd argue maybe the second most untouchable prospect in the Mets system. I'd probably put Carson Bench as the most untouchable, but to each their own. I think at this stage, it's more likely that we see McLean pitch out of the bullpen for the Mets this year than the rotation because of all the starting pitchers the Mets have. And I've talked about this before. He does feel like this year's version of what we were talking about last year with Brandon Sproat, where it was, all right, if Brandon Sproat comes up to AAA and thrives, maybe he ends up being a bullpen addition down the stretch. Now, Sproat came up to AAA last year and struggled, and that's why that conversation never really got off the ground too much. But McLean is now in AAA thriving, showing that against the best competition he can find in the minor leagues, his stuff is playing. So I do think the Mets might decide, you know what? Let's start to see what it looks like out of the bullpen. Let's shorten him up. And when it's the end of July and he's already gone through and he's gotten another, 6 more starts under his belt and they've all gone well, or maybe it's 5 more starts, and you're getting past the deadline, and now you're starting to look and you're starting to count innings a little bit, you might say, you know what? This guy could be dynamic out of the bullpen with his sweeper, which is one of the best sweepers in minor league baseball. He gets a ridiculous amount of spin on all of his pitches, but particularly the sweeper. His fastball, that's got a combination of both run and ride to it. Just a really, really good fastball. Those 2 pitches alone could be lights out in the bullpen. So I still think that's the most likely outcome if he is going to make it up to the show. I think a lot would have to happen to the Mets' big league depth for them to really consider McLean, especially because Blade Tidwell is still on the 40, as is Brandon Waddell, as is Justin Hagenman. So if it was a spot start, you're not going to put your top pitching prospect in there for a spot start. It would have to be, all right, there's a runway. Last year when Christian Scott got that opportunity in May, the Mets were really struggling. They were grasping for straws. And their rotation hadn't been that good at that point. They didn't have David Peterson healthy as another key cog in that rotation. They weren't getting what we eventually saw out of Sean Manaea. Sevy was looking pretty good at the time, and if I remember, maybe Quintana was as well, but the rotation needed a lift when they brought Christian Scott up. And he went through his lumps. So I don't think we're going to see McLean in the near future, but I would not rule out seeing him at the end of the season because it could be one of those things where you're just looking at trying to put the best 13 pitchers together for a playoff roster, and you're looking at your organization, and you're saying there's not a world where Nolan McLean is not one of our best 13 pitchers. And that's what the Brewers did in 2018 with Corbin Burns, and he played a real role in that team, making their deepest run with David Stearns as their top executive. They went to Game 7 of the NLCS against the Dodgers, if my memory is correct on that. I'm pretty sure it is. And Burns was great in the playoffs. So we'll see. We'll see if the Mets go down that road. We'll see if that is the decision they ultimately make on McLean. But either way, what he's done this season to improve his prospect stock, now he's maybe getting close to a consensus top 50 prospect in baseball. It's been really impressive. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Appreciate all of you for tuning into the show today. I will have a typical show for you on Monday, breaking down the final game of the Mets series against the Rays. Be an off day, so we probably won't look ahead to the Phillies series or the Braves series. Jeez, I'm getting way ahead of myself. We won't be looking at the Braves series preview just yet, so maybe we'll do a little more prospect stuff. We'll see what storylines might pop up during the game on Sunday. But I will be back for another show then. As always, thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button if you want to be a Locked On Mets insider. Find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, check out Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.